under the ancient sun of the great savannah, where the baobab trees stretch toward the skies like wise old giants and the red earth remembers every step of the past, there lived a woman named Mama Zora. The village of Jadinyori, cradled between the mountains and river, knew her not just by name but by the endurance etched into her bones. She was a widow, not once but twice over, and her life was a canvas painted in grief and survival. Her hut stood on the edge of the village, where the millet fields bowed in the wind and the goats returned home by instinct. It was made of clay and love, patched by her hands, warmed by the fire she lit every morning with the same prayer whispered to the gods of her ancestors. She was the mother of 7, 1 son from her first marriage, and 6 daughters from her second. The villagers knew her strength. They saw her walk barefoot to the river, carry bundles twice her weight, scrub strangers' clothes, and return home each dusk with only a few cowries and scraps of food. Yet her back never bent with shame, and her voice never lost the music of hope. Her daughters, Amina, Halima, Nia, Ife, Osha, and Zula, were known for their beauty, not the loud, boastful kind but a beauty soft and dignified. Their heads were always wrapped in clean cloth, their feet rarely stepped outside the compound, and their eyes spoke only when permitted. The village boys, curious as all youth are, dared not come near them, for Mama Zora's gaze was fierce, and her rules were firm. Kambiri, the son from her first husband, lived with them too. She raised him like her own heart, and though he shared no blood with her second children, there was no difference in the way food was portioned, clothes were mended, or hands were held when fever struck. The girls called him Dada, elder brother. He was quiet, often seen sharpening tools or sitting alone beneath the neem tree. Some thought him strange, others pitied the boy who lost his mother so young. Mama Zara saw him as her responsibility. After all, she had promised her dying husband to raise Kambiri with care. The seasons turned. Rain came and went. Crops flourished and failed. Time moved like the slow rhythm of the talking drum. Then, as the dry season approached, a shadow fell over the house, not one cast by the sun, but by fate. It began with Amina. Her laughter faded. Her skin dulled. She vomited at dawn and shivered in her sleep. Mama Zara crushed herbs, called the local healer, and when none of the leaves or roots brought relief, she walked half a day to the town of Zubri where a real doctor lived. The diagnosis was a blow. "Your daughter is pregnant," said the doctor, a man who did not know Mama Zara and did not know what his words had done. She fell to her knees. "No. That cannot be. She is a virgin. She does not even speak to boys." But the doctor's face was made of stone. "The womb does not lie." Mama Zara dragged Amina home, her heart boiling and breaking. She screamed, she struck her daughter, she demanded answers. But Amina, through swollen eyes, wept and said only, "Mama, I swear by the spirits, I do not know. I do not know how this happened." The woman who had birthed her, who had watched her take her first steps, listened carefully. In the silence of the night, when even the frogs stopped singing, Mama Zara sat and stared at the fire. She remembered how Amina flinched when touched, how shame had clung to her like a second skin. She remembered the oath in her daughter's eyes. And she believed her. Painfully, she accepted the child. She swaddled the newborn when it came. She called him Ashon, which meant gift in disguise. But before the shame of one birth could settle, her second daughter, Halima, fell ill with the same signs. Then Nia. One by one, like curses stitched into time, they all bore the same burden. 3 daughters. 3 innocent girls. All claimed they knew nothing. All swore they had never left the compound, never spoken to a man. Mama Zara's mind was a whirlwind. She cried beneath the moon, her wails like those of a wounded animal. Her neighbors heard but dared not ask. Finally, with blistered feet and a heart turned to ash, she went to the palace of King Afolobi the Just. The kingdom of Nyambi stretched far, but the king was known as a listener of sorrows and a punisher of beasts. She arrived with dust in her hair and no sandals on her feet. The palace guards laughed at first, the madwoman. But when she lifted her eyes, the sorrow in them stopped the mockery. She was taken before the king. She wept before him, begging to speak in private. My story is one of shame, my king. If I speak it in front of many, my daughters will have no dignity left. King Afolabi, moved by the deep sadness in her eyes, led her to his private chambers and listened. As she spoke, the wind outside changed direction. Birds stopped singing. Even the flame in the oil lamp seemed to still. When she finished, the king stood in silence, fist clenched. This is no longer your burden, Mama Zara. This is now the burden of the crown. I will find the beast who dares to wear the face of a man while hiding the heart of a demon. He summoned Chief Boko. A plan was devised. A dog, trained to recognize unnatural scents and movements, was brought. That night, the dog was tied outside Mama Zara's home. Guards hid in shadows. The family was told to pretend nothing had changed. Hours passed. The moon moved silently. The crickets chirped. And then, a shadow landed softly on the roof. The dog growled. Then it barked, wildly. The guards rushed in. A man was captured. Masked. Silent. When the cloth was torn from his face, the word cracked open. It was Kambiri. The boy she had raised. The one who had called her a mother in his childhood. The one her daughters had trusted like blood. She collapsed. Her daughters screamed. The villagers gathered, drawn by the commotion. At dawn, he was taken to the king's court. There, kneeling, he confessed. His words were poison. He spoke of lust, of jealousy, of potions from a dark herbalist that could put the house to sleep. He had entered by night. He had violated trust and blood. Mama Zara could not speak. She stared ahead as though her soul had departed. King Afolabi, with fire in his eyes, gave the order. With one swing of Chief Boko's blade, Kambiri's life ended. But the story did not end there. The king, in an act of restoration, chose 3 noble young men from his court. They were righteous, respected, and willing to take the daughters as their wives, not out of pity, but in honor of justice. The marriages were grand, the dowries rich, and the names of the daughters cleared. Mama Zara fell at the king's feet, tears streaming. The kingdom watched as a mother who had been broken was now slowly being healed. After the execution, the air inside the great court of King Afolabi was so still, it felt as if the breath of the entire kingdom had paused. The blood of the betrayer had barely dried on the palace stones when the old widow turned away from the execution ground. Her feet were trembling, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of betrayal. The sky that day was not blue but grey like ash, as though even the heavens mourned what had unfolded. Mama Zara walked back to her village in silence, her 6 daughters behind her like shadows, grief wrapped in human form. The people of Jadinyori who once whispered behind her back now stepped aside with bowed heads. For the truth had been sharper than rumor, heavier than judgment. The village griot, Boba Oko, a man whose beard was longer than a lion's tail and whose tongue carried the memory of 100 generations, sat beneath the Iroko tree and began to chant what had occurred. His drumbeat was slow and mournful. A brother turned beast, he sang. A mother walked barefoot to the palace of thunder. A king heard. A sword answered. And justice sang from the mouth of steel. The song echoed from hut to hut. In the days that followed, Mama Zara's name became one of honor. She was called Ayotito, Mother of Truth. But in her own heart, the silence was unbearable. No matter how loud the village sang, her heart remained cloaked in grief. Her daughters tried to smile, but smiles are weak against the scars betrayal leaves behind. King Afolabi sent his finest healers and midwives to her hut. He sent boats of cloth, gourds of honey, baskets of yam, beads from the river traders of Mojikuru, and a royal letter sealed with leopard wax declaring that her family was under the protection of the crown. But what he sent next would change everything. On the third morning after Kambiri's execution, a messenger arrived, holding in his hand a carved staff adorned with lion hair, the sign of a royal invitation. The king had summoned Mama Zora and her daughters to the palace again, this time not for justice, but for healing. When they arrived, they found the court transformed. Instead of silence and accusation, the hall was adorned with ceremonial cloth. Musicians played soft flutes. The aroma of shea oil and roasted maize filled the air. And seated at the side of the king were 3 noblemen, warriors and scholars who had come from distant provinces to answer the king's call. One was Obesai, son of a famed judge from the mountain city of Oridoro. Another was Kwabina, a skilled horseman from the gold valleys of Ashera. The third, Sefiu, was a young healer from the western swamps whose knowledge of herbs had saved the king's own mother during a fevered winter. King Afolabi stood and addressed the court. These daughters, he said, pointing gently toward Zora's children, have endured a horror no spirit should ever suffer. Yet they have carried their pain with the dignity of queens. I declare today that no man in this kingdom shall ever cast shame upon them. And to restore what evil tried to take, I offer them what is sacred, a choice. A new name, a new chapter, and a hand in marriage from men of honor. The court burst into murmurs. Such an act had never been done. To pair women whose innocence had been stolen with men of such status. Yet no one dared question King Afolabi. He was not just a ruler. He was the heart of the land. The daughters were given time. Not all accepted at once. Some wept in fear of trusting again. Some sat in quiet rooms with the suitors, speaking of stars, of books, of fears and songs. And over days, a new chapter bloomed. 3 of the daughters, Amina, Halima, and Nia, chose to marry. Their weddings were unlike any seen before in Jadinyori. Drummers from 10 villages came. Beads from across the rivers were woven into their hair. Their names were spoken not as victims, but as survivors, as phoenixes rising from ash. Mama Zara stood beside them, holding their hands. She wore a robe of crimson and gold, gifted by the queen herself, and a crown of cowrie shells strung by village maidens. She smiled for the first time in moons, though her eyes still shimmered with remembrance. But not all was healed. The remaining 3 daughters, Ife, Osha, and Zula, chose to wait. They could not yet bear to trust, and their silence was a language no one dared to interrupt. The king respected their choice and granted them land, trade apprenticeships, and royal protection. Healing, he said, does not come with a drumbeat. It comes like rain. Unexpected and slow. In the moon that followed, Mama Zara returned to her compound, now rebuilt with royal timber and painted by the village artisans. Her days were quieter, her steps a little slower, but her spirit had become legend. Travelers came from far away to hear her speak. Midwives named their daughters after hers. The village griot composed a long song, one that took 3 nights to sing, titled The Mother Who Faced the Leopard. It would be sung for generations. And yet, the tale is not over. Because pain, like the roots of a fig tree, runs deep and wide. The rains came earlier that year. Heavy, relentless rains that pounded the earth and carved new paths into the red soil. The villagers said the ancestors were weeping, not out of sadness, but to cleanse the land of its curse. Every downpour felt like the sky washing away what could not be undone. In Mama Zara's compound, silence had become a companion. Not the suffocating kind, but one filled with breath, memory, and gentle mourning. The marriage songs had faded, the guests had gone, and now, only the true work remained, the healing of hearts. Mama Zara would sit beneath the mango tree each morning, shelling groundnuts into a woven calabash. The children of the village began to gather near her again. They did not fear her grief anymore, they understood it now. She had become a kind of elder spirit, a living griotte of sorrow and strength. One of the children, a curious boy with wide eyes named Lomu, once asked her, "Mama Zora, did you stop loving Kambiri when he did what he did?" She looked at him, her hand still, the breeze tugging gently at her wrapper. "I loved the child he was. But I cannot love the monster he chose to become." "Can someone be both?" the boy asked. She was quiet for a moment. "The river gives life. The river also drowns. The heart of a person can hold both rain and fire. But what we choose to pour into the world, that is what defines us." The boy sat quietly after that, and a few days later, he carved a small wooden statue of Mama Zora with her 6 daughters around her. It was placed beside the village well as a token of honor. While Amina, Halima, and Nia now lived with their husbands, each in different regions of the kingdom, they often returned to visit Mama Zora. They brought spices, colored fabrics, jars of honey, and letters filled with words they had once feared to write. One of them, Halima, had begun to sing again. Her husband, Kwabina, encouraged her, saying her voice was a gift from the moon itself. On their third visit, Halima stood beneath the night sky and sang the song of a survivor, the first time since her silence. Her voice was not trembling. It was thunder wrapped in melody. The other daughters, those who had chosen solitude, began to stir in their own ways. Ife took to pottery. Her hands found peace in the rhythm of shaping clay. Asha began teaching children under the Iroko tree, her voice soft but steady. And Zula, the quietest of all, found herself drawn to the old herbalist woman, Nana Temb, whose herbs and wisdom were feared and respected in equal measure. Under her mentorship, Zula began learning the names of leaves, the meanings of roots, the secrets whispered by bark and smoke. One evening, Nana Temb looked at her and said, "You carry fire inside you, child. Not anger. Purpose. You were wounded, but you are not weak. Do not let the world mistake your silence for absence." Zula never forgot those words. Meanwhile, in the palace of King Afolabi, things had changed. The king's advisors had taken note of what had happened to Mama Zora's daughters. A decree was written, the Daughters' Protection Edict, which stated that any girl found with child, or accused of dishonor, would not be judged before a full royal inquiry. No more would silence be forced upon the innocent. No more would shame bury the truth before justice could speak. The edict sent ripples through the kingdom. Some elders grumbled. "In our time, girls stayed silent. This new way is dangerous." But the younger generation listened. Women who had buried their voices for years stepped forward. A girl from the village of Idu reported her uncle. A merchant's daughter in Esauri brought charges against a visiting priest. The court swelled with voices, and though not every cry led to justice, each one was no longer unheard. King Afolabi formed the Council of Mothers, a group of 10 women, chosen from across the kingdom, whose task was to hear such cases before they reached the royal court. Mama Zara was invited to lead it. She declined at first. "My heart is weary," she told the king. "Let another carry the fire." But Afolabi insisted. "You did not just carry the fire, Mama Zara. You lit the torch for others to follow." So she accepted. And every moon cycle, she traveled to the palace and sat in a carved chair beside the throne, her staff in hand, listening. Sometimes she wept quietly. Sometimes she asked questions so piercing that liars could not stand. But always, she was just. A shrine was built on the edge of the kingdom, called Otutu Aleho, the place of quiet fire. There, women could come, light a candle, leave a cloth, whisper their stories into the wind. It became sacred ground. Even the spirits respected its silence. Years passed. Mama Zara grew older, her walk slower, her hair white like powdered cassava. But her voice remained iron. Her compound, once a place of tears, became a gathering place for girls who had nowhere to go. She took them in, taught them to grind millet, to stitch calico, to breathe strength into their hearts. Some called it a refuge. Others called it a miracle. But to Zora, it was simply a duty. And in all that time, not once did she remove Kambiri's old sandals from beside the doorway. They remained there, not as a sign of remembrance, but as a reminder. Evil, she believed, does not always come from the outside. Sometimes, it grows in the shadows of trust. And so we must keep watch. Time, as the griots say, does not walk, it dances. And so the seasons spun their rhythm across the kingdom. The millet grew, was harvested, and grew again. Children who once played beside Mama Zora's courtyard were now old enough to chase goats and climb mango trees. The baobab, beneath which Zora used to sit, thickened its bark, hiding rings of memory within its trunk. In the village of Jadinyori, the house that once stood like a shrine of sorrow now breathed with life. Where before there were whispers, there was now laughter. Girls who bore no family name, only broken stories, came to live within its walls. They were fed, clothed, and taught not only how to survive, but how to speak. Speak not with mouths alone, but with eyes, actions, and dignity. People called the house Doki and Zora, the house of Zora. It became a symbol. Not of tragedy, but of transformation. Across the land, women wore beads carved in the shape of the house's pointed roof. No festival passed without a dancer invoking the strength of the widow who had challenged the kingdom and been heard. Zora's daughters, now grown women, returned often. Amina had given birth to twin sons. Halima, who once sang with a voice trembled by trauma, now taught music in the royal court. Nia had become a midwife, and it was she who delivered the daughter of the queen herself during a dangerous birth. The other three, those who had stayed behind, also carved parts of legend. Ife's pottery was so fine that even traders from beyond the salt road came seeking her work. She began engraving symbols into her pieces: tears, suns, open hands, footprints. Each one told a story without words. Her work sold at festival markets like groundnuts in harvest season. Osha, once withdrawn, became the head of the village school. She taught both boys and girls the same. When asked why, she simply said, "Because silence was once my prison. Education is their ladder." Zula, the quiet storm, became the most feared and respected herbalist in all of Nyambi. She learned the ancient language of herbs, could speak to bees, and made medicines that even palace physicians could not replicate. But she was also a guardian. When young girls came to her with shame on their tongues and fear in their eyes, she gave them shelter, and if needed, revenge. It was said she could make a man's lies rot his tongue, or a molester's footsteps go unheard so that he would walk off a cliff. Whether this was truth or tale, none dared find out. And Mama Zora, the thread that bound them all, lived on. She no longer visited the palace often. Her knees were not what they used to be, and her eyes had grown cloudy. But her voice had not lost its fire. When messengers came seeking her wisdom, she would laugh. "Why do you ask an old woman what tomorrow holds?" she would say. "Ask the girls I raised. They are tomorrow." Still, the kingdom did not forget her. Every moon of the third reign, the capital held a 3-day festival called Ejenyuwa, the Festival of Daughters. Women from every village came to tell stories, to sing, to share victories and wounds alike. No man was permitted to speak on the main day. Only listen. And at the center of it all stood a carved wooden statue of Mama Zora and her 6 daughters, hands clasped, eyes forward. During the first festival, King Afolabi stood beside the statue and declared, "Let it be known, this tale is not only of sorrow, but of the seed of justice." Zora taught us that sometimes, monsters wear faces we recognize. But truth has sharper teeth than evil. And now, because of her, our daughters sleep with eyes closed in peace, not fear. That night, the stars were bright, as if the ancestors themselves sat in the sky, watching the kingdom they had once shaped. But even stars fade before dawn. One night, under a sky thick with clouds, Mama Zora lay on her mat, breath shallow. She had not eaten in days, and though she smiled when her daughters came to her side, her hands barely moved. Around her, the 6 women she had raised now stood as sentinels. "You must not cry for me," Zara whispered. "I am not dying. I am becoming story." The candle flickered. "The wind will carry me," she said, "and the river will speak my name to the rocks." Then she closed her eyes. And the earth was silent. Word spread like wildfire across the land. Bells rang in temples, drums beat in mourning. The queen wept openly. The king did not leave his room for a day. January was flooded with visitors, young girls, old warriors, mothers with babies strapped to their backs, all came to say goodbye. She was buried at dawn, beneath the baobab. Not in silence, but in song. The griot Baba Oko, now nearly blind, sang the longest praise poem of his life. His voice cracked with age, but his words danced. She was the womb of courage. She walked barefoot into thunder's mouth. And the thunder listened. She turned her pain into fire. And from that fire, lit the torches of a kingdom. Her daughters did not wear black. They wore white and red, mourning and triumph. And each carried a bowl of water, which they poured into the earth. "Return to the source," they said, "but never leave us." In the years that followed, stories of Mama Zara traveled farther than any map had drawn. Her tale became a rite of passage for young women. Her name became a greeting of strength. Her home, preserved as a sanctuary, stood untouched, its walls painted every season by volunteers who knew what it stood for. And far into the future, when children gathered around fires under moonlight, they would hear these words from the griots. "Let me tell you the story of the woman who taught a king to listen." Generations passed. The faces of the land changed. Children grew into warriors, into mothers, into leaders. Trees grew taller, and new huts replaced the old. The kingdom of Nyambe evolved, with new roads carved across the plains, market towns rising at the edges of old villages, and travelers arriving with tongues and textiles from distant lands. But amid the thunder of time, one thing remained unchanged: the story of Mama Zara. Her name was no longer just spoken, it was sung, carved, danced, prayed. Her likeness, once carved into wood, was now etched into royal cloth, painted in vibrant earth tones on the walls of schools, engraved in stone beside the sacred wells. And her blood lived on. Amina's son, Kweku, grew into a diplomat, respected across kingdoms for his fairness. It was said that when he spoke, people listened not because his voice was loud, but because he had learned from the woman who had once silenced a court with tears alone. Halima's daughter, Naomi, became a famous poet. Her words traveled on palm leaf scrolls and drum skin tablets. She would write verses like, "I am born from a scar, but I bloom like morning. My grandmother walked through fire, and I carry her warmth." Zula never had children of her own, but hundreds called her Mama Zula. Her upcraft turned into a formal guild, women in every province trained under her teachings. She documented her knowledge in a great book made of bark and hide, written not in one tongue but 3, so that no daughter of Nyambe would ever again lack the words to speak or the tools to heal. The king, now aged, had long passed the crown to his son, Obodil, a wise ruler born during the days of Zora's uprising. Obodil had grown up hearing her name not as folklore, but as part of his own memory. On the day of his coronation, he knelt at Zora's grave and whispered, "You taught my father to rule not only with sword, but with listening. I promise, I will carry your wisdom like a drumbeat." And he did. Under King Obodil, the Council of Mothers expanded to 20 seats. Women now sat on the Royal Advisory Board. Laws changed. Marriage consent laws were introduced. Ritual purification for victims of assault became protected by royal edict. And every year, on the anniversary of Zora's death, The bells of the capital rang 12 times at dawn. In January, the house of Zora remained more than a home, it became an institution. It was now called the sanctuary of the leopard woman. No girl in the kingdom had to suffer in silence again. If there was no family, Zora's name was family. If there was no justice, Zora's memory gave strength. Mothers told their daughters, if you ever feel fear, go where Zora once walked. The ground still remembers her feet. One day, a foreign scholar from across the great waters visited Nyambe. He asked an old griot who the statue of the woman with 6 daughters represented. The griot chuckled, his grey beard fluttering in the wind. You ask who she is. She is every mother who ever kept her children safe. She is every woman whose truth was denied until she screamed it into the stars. She is the storm wrapped in a wrapper. She is Zora. And when you hear thunder in the dry season, that is her walking the sky, making sure no one forgets. The scholar nodded, and the griot added softly. Go sit by the baobab near her grave. If you listen well, it still hums her name. And so, our story was not just remembered, it was lived. It lived in the girl who said no. In the boy who listened instead of laughed. In the king who ruled with a mother's patience. In the widow who raised a child that was not hers and dared to call the gods to court. Mama Zara became more than flesh. She became a proverb. And in Africa, a proverb never dies.